Hello dear friends. James is a rich CEO, but why did he fall in love with a poor girl? What made two worlds and two different fates come together? What did those two people go through? Let's find out today. Her name was Dee, a poor village girl who had never known anything beyond the scent of wood smoke and the roughness of dry firewood against her palms. Every morning, she would walk miles along dusty country roads, calling softly, "Would you like to buy some firewood?" Yet, no one ever stopped. To most people, she was invisible, just another shadow in the sun. At the same time, Min, a young CEO freshly returned from studying abroad, drove through that same road. He was the heir to a prosperous wood processing business, handsome, sharp, successful, and distant. Beneath his calm, polished demeanor lay a man weighed down by expectations and loneliness. As his car turned a corner, he saw Deep stumble and fall, the bundle of wood scattering across the ground. Without hesitation, Min stopped, stepped out, and helped her to her feet. That simple moment, a hand reaching down, a pair of eyes meeting, would change both of their lives. Deep's hands trembled as she thanked him. Min asked where she lived, and in their brief conversation, he learned the harsh truth behind her quiet smile. Deep had once been married into a wealthier family, but tragedy had struck early. Her husband had been sent to prison for marrying her before she was of age. His family, believing she had ruined their son's life, threw her and her unborn child out in the middle of the night. "I was 22, she said softly, eyes downcast. "They said I couldn't give them a grandchild. They called me cursed." Min stood there, silent. Something stirred within him, pity, perhaps, but deeper than that, he saw in her the same solitude that haunted his own reflection. Two souls from different worlds, both scarred in their own way. A few days later, Deep went to the large wood factory at the edge of the village to beg for work. She had no resume, no proper clothes, just a fragile hope. The manager frowned. "We don't hire without papers." Other workers snickered quietly. "Look at her," one muttered. "She doesn't even have shoes." Upstairs, behind the glass wall of his office, Min watched everything. His expression didn't change, but he said calmly to the manager, "Hire her." From that day, Deep became one of the factory workers. She worked tirelessly, hauling logs, sweeping sawdust, never complaining, even when her hands bled. Min often came down to the workshop, pretending to inspect the work but always stealing glances at her. Something about her quiet resilience drew him in. One evening, while going through old company records, Min discovered a document about the stolen land certificate that had ruined Deep's reputation years ago. Intrigued, he dug deeper and eventually uncovered the truth. The real thief was a relative of her former husband's family. Deep had been innocent all along. When he told her, she broke down. "You mean, it wasn't me?" she whispered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Min simply nodded, his voice gentle. "You didn't deserve what they did to you." He then took her to an old family farmhouse, a quiet, abandoned place surrounded by hills and orange trees. "Stay here," he said. "It's peaceful and safe. Let this be your home for now." Deep stood speechless at the wooden doorway, the setting sun painting her face in gold. "You've done too much for me," she said, her voice trembling. Min smiled faintly. "I just want you to rest. You fought alone long enough." That night, they shared a humble meal, fried eggs, boiled vegetables, and fish sauce. The flickering light of a single oil lamp cast shadows on the walls as they sat across from each other. Min looked at her and said softly, "From now on, no one will ever hurt you again." Deep felt something bloom inside her, something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Peace. Maybe even love. Days turned into weeks. Deep tended to the small farm, feeding chickens, planting trees, and restoring the once forgotten house. Min visited whenever he could, bringing food, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing but his quiet presence. In those visits, the hardened CEO found himself smiling more often than he had in years. One stormy evening, Min came back drenched from the rain. Deep ran to him, wrapping him in a towel, scolding softly, "You're soaked through." He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and said, "I'm home." That word, home, made her heart tremble. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Time passed, and Deep became the manager of that very farm. Under Min's guidance, the company expanded, opening a new factory in her village to give jobs to poor families. The people began to talk about them, the young CEO and the girl who once sold firewood. At the grand opening ceremony, Min took Deep's hand in front of everyone. His voice was steady but full of emotion. "If it weren't for her," he said, "I would have forgotten what kindness means." Deep looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "And because of you," she replied, "I learned that even those who've been broken can be loved again." Behind them, the sunset spread across the horizon, washing the hills in gold. The wind rustled through the young acacia trees that Min had once planted, whispering like a promise, a reminder that love, once rooted deeply enough, could grow anywhere. He used to think his greatest achievement would be the factory, the exports, the numbers in his bank account. But standing there beside Deep, he realized his greatest success was her, the woman who taught him that love can exist beyond wealth, beyond class, beyond pain. And so, people began to call them by a name that captured their story perfectly. The couple between two worlds, the CEO and the firewood girl.